In April 2025, Bill Maher walked into the White House carrying a bet almost no one else in American comedy was willing to make. He sat down across from Donald Trump, shared a meal that also included Kid Rock, and later told his audience that the president had been gracious and measured, words that stood in sharp contrast to the persona Maher had spent years dissecting on Real Time. It was not a stunt designed for clips. Maher framed the evening as a genuine act of political engagement. If the president absorbed information through private conversations more than through briefings or hostile interviews, then someone willing to say difficult things should be in the room. But what happened behind those closed doors, and the catastrophic fallout that followed, would set off a 15-month chain reaction that shattered friendships, enraged millions of fans, and ultimately exposed a terrifying psychological reality about how power operates at the highest levels of American politics. And then, the trap snapped shut. The rehook. Imagine risking your entire 30-year career, alienating your closest friends, and enduring a toxic tidal wave of public outrage, all to test one single radical hypothesis. Can Donald Trump be reasoned with if you treat him with respect? Bill Maher put his entire legacy on the line to answer that question. He walked straight into the lion's den, expecting a high-stakes clash of political heavyweights. But what he encountered across that White House dinner table wasn't a ranting political firebrand. It was a charming, soft-spoken host. It seemed like a monumental triumph for civil discourse, a historic breakthrough. Except, it was a complete illusion, a psychological illusion that would take 15 agonizing months to detonate. Because while Maher thought he was building a bridge of mutual respect, he was actually walking straight into a psychological trap, one that would end in public humiliation, a destroyed inner circle, and a brutal lesson that every political player in Washington should be terrified of. The setup. The high-stakes gamble. To understand the sheer madness of what Bill Maher did in April 2025, you have to understand the environment of late-night television at that moment. For nearly a decade, late-night comedy had transformed into a total ideological war zone. Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, every single night was an escalating arms race of visceral, unyielding mockery against Donald Trump. The formula was predictable. The audience knew the punchlines before they were delivered. The echo chamber was sealed shut. Enter Bill Maher. Maher had built his entire brand on a very specific, fiercely defended identity, the fearless contrarian. He was the guy who hated tribalism, hated hypocrisy, and was willing to call out his own side just as viciously as he called out his enemies. But even for Maher, walking through the gates of the White House to sit down for a private dinner with Donald Trump and Kid Rock was an unfathomable gamble. The logistics were kept under wraps. The atmosphere inside the executive residence was surprisingly relaxed. For hours, Maher observed the man who had dominated global news and polarizing political debates for a decade. And what Maher saw surprised him. Trump was not yelling. He was not tweeting in real time. He was attentive. He listened. He passed the food. He made jokes. He was, by Maher's own admission, gracious and measured. When Maher walked out of the White House that night, he believed he had discovered something profound, a hidden mechanism for political change. On the very next episode of Real Time, Maher sat before his audience and carefully articulated a distinction that would come to define the entire saga. It does not matter who Trump is across a dinner table with a comedian. It matters who he is when he exercises power on the world stage. This dual framing, private openness on one side, public record on the other, was extraordinarily generous. It was a sophisticated adult attempt to separate the human being from the political machine. Maher believed that if Trump processed the world through personal relationships rather than formal intelligence briefings, then having a fair-minded, critical voice in his private circle was a vital public service. It was Maher's Nixon to China moment, a historic reach across an impossible divide. He made the wager, and the price of that wager was extracted instantly. The escalation phase, the social slaughter. The backlash didn't build over weeks, it erupted within hours. The liberal establishment, Maher's core demographic for decades, viewed the dinner not as an act of brave engagement, but as an unforgivable act of treason. The outrage was immediate, deafening, and relentless. Then came the strike that cut deepest. Larry David, an icon of comedy, a cultural titan, and Maher's personal friend of nearly 2 decades, decided that a private phone call wasn't enough. He went straight to the nuclear option. David penned a blistering, razor-sharp satirical essay in the New York Times titled, My Dinner with Adolf. The piece imagined a warmly detailed, friendly private account of a pleasant meal with a young, charming Adolf Hitler in a German tavern. The satire was brutal. The subtext was inescapable. It does not matter how charming a tyrant is over bread rolls. Private charm means absolutely nothing in the face of public danger. The essay sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. The 20-year friendship between Maher and David fractured on the spot. By Maher's own later admission, the damage was permanent. It never recovered. And the hits kept coming. Actor Sean Penn publicly expressed absolute disbelief, privately grilling mutual contacts on why Maher was giving any weight whatsoever to Trump's private civility. Longtime viewers began canceling their HBO subscriptions in protest. Maher was being abandoned by his peers, his friends, and his fan base. How did Maher react? He doubled down. Instead of apologizing, instead of offering a diplomatic retraction, Maher dug his heels into the dirt. On air, he openly dismissed the departing segment of his audience as idiots. He insisted that refusing to talk to the most powerful man on earth was childish, cowardly, and self-defeating. For nearly a full year, the story hung in a tense, suffocating limbo. Maher continued his weekly broadsides against Trump's policies, but he aggressively defended the principle of the dinner. Trump surprisingly kept quiet. He didn't tweet about Maher. He didn't mock him at rallies. For 10 months, 11 months, 12 months, the experiment seemed to be holding. It wasn't an explosive success, but it wasn't a total failure either. Maher believed he had carved out a unique, protected space, a middle ground where an independent thinker could critique the king while maintaining a thread of personal access. He thought he was safe. He was dead wrong. The mid-video twist, the Valentine's Day ambush. On February 14, 2026, Valentine's Day, the illusion shattered into a million sharp pieces. Donald Trump logged onto Truth Social. With a few taps of his thumb, he systematically obliterated 15 months of calculated diplomacy, quiet respect, and Maher's carefully guarded reputation. There was no grace. There was no measure. There was only raw, unadulterated political execution. Trump posted a message that discarded every single trace of the warmth from that April evening. He didn't just criticize Maher, he dismantled him. He called Maher a highly overrated lightweight. He declared that the White House dinner had been a complete waste of time. And then, Trump delivered the ultimate insult, the specific payload engineered to inflict maximum psychological damage on Bill Maher. Trump wrote that Maher was no different than Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, or Stephen Colbert. Read that again. To an outsider, that might sound like a standard political insult. But to Bill Maher, it was a lethal, calculated strike directly at his soul. Maher had spent 30 years differentiating himself from the rest of late-night television. He didn't do silly lip-sync battles. He didn't do scripted viral games. He didn't run nightly anti-Trump echo chambers. He had taken massive professional risks to engage conservative arguments in good faith. He had accepted a White House invitation that Kimmel, Fallon, and Colbert would have burned on live television before accepting. And in one single sentence, Trump completely erased that distinction. He flattened Maher into the exact same category as the host who had mocked him relentlessly every night for a decade. The message was crystal clear. Your nuance meant nothing. Your defense of our dinner meant nothing. Your lost friendships meant nothing. You are just another enemy in a suit. The goodwill wasn't just canceled, it was retroactively erased. Intensity buildup. The cold reality of the ledger. The psychological impact of this moment cannot be overstated. What Trump demonstrated in that single Truth Social post was a masterclass in autocratic power dynamics. Goodwill does not bank. In normal human relationships, if you defend someone, if you take bullets for them, if you risk your own friendships to treat them fairly, you build up a balance of credit. You store mutual respect in a bank account that can be drawn from during difficult moments. With Donald Trump, that bank account does not exist. There is no interest. There is no cumulative credit. There is only what have you done for me in the last 5 minutes? The very second Maher asserted his editorial independence on real time, the entire 15-month balance of private civility was liquidated. Maher was backed into a corner. His liberal critics were laughing, pointing at him with a collective, "We told you so!" His conservative audience was cheering Trump's insult. His friends were still gone. His reputation as a brilliant political strategist was in tatters. Most people in Hollywood would have gone silent. They would have hidden under a rock, issued a canned statement through a publicist, and prayed for the news cycle to move on. Bill Maher didn't hide. On March 6, 2026, Maher walked onto the set of Real Time for his famous New Rules segment. The atmosphere in the studio was electric with tension. The audience was waiting for a meltdown. They were waiting for a vicious emotional payback. Instead, Maher did something far more dangerous. He brought out a ledger. The climax. The public accounting. Maher sat in front of the camera, looked directly into the lens, and opened fire. But he didn't just hurl insults back. He turned Trump's favorite weapon against him, declaring that it was actually Donald Trump who was suffering from a terminal case of Bill Maher derangement syndrome. Then, in an environment that strictly demands absolute loyalty to a tribe, Maher executed a stunning act of intellectual defiance. He performed a public double-entry audit of the Trump presidency, live on national television. First, he turned to the credit side of the ledger. He forced his overwhelmingly liberal audience to sit in uncomfortable silence as he itemized the things Trump had gotten right. He praised Trump's border security policies as an undeniable strategic win. He explicitly supported the targeted deportation of violent criminal gang members, calling it a common-sense policy that drove real electoral success. He backed the administration's decisive military strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. He applauded the high-stakes military operation that removed Nicolás Maduro from power in Venezuela. He admitted Trump was entirely correct to force NATO allies to pay their fair share of global defense costs. He gave Trump massive credit for explicitly rejecting Nick Fuentes and the extremist anti-Semitic factions of his movement, quoting Trump's exact words, "We don't want you." And in a rare moment of media humility, Maher openly admitted that his own economic forecast, predicting a total financial collapse by the 4th of July, had been dead wrong. The audience was stunned, but Maher was only half done. Without breaking eye contact, he flipped the page to the debit side of the ledger and unloaded a devastating volley.